Hey there, thanks for stopping by. I'm Bluebear, and this is going to be another Incarnate video. Today we're going to be talking about parts and what they mean in Incarnate, and if you stick around to the end, you're not going to believe how many Incarnates you can actually collect in this game. Let's get into it. So I think of building Incarnates like building Legos. You can see here that you've got all these Lego heads with different facial expressions on them. And when you start mixing and matching them with different bodies and other accessories like hats and clothes and all that stuff, you start getting different characters built out of the Legos. So you end up seeing something like this, where all of those heads, you had something similar, but when you mix and match those heads with other pieces or other Legos or accessories, you get different characters. So that's very much what it is in Incarnate. You have the parts that create these different incarnates or heroes or champions by mixing and matching all the parts. The parts are really the core of what the incarnate is because it sets their abilities and how strong their base stats are. All right, so what is a part in incarnate? A part can be placed in one of three slots. These parts, when you forge an incarnate, give your incarnate the abilities in the base stats that the incarnate has in order to play the game. There are three types of slots, like I said: the mind, body, and soul. And you fill each one of those slots with a specific part that you want to use for that incarnate. So there's multiple combinations that you can make based on the parts that you have to make different types of incarnates. And that's the unique part about this game, is that you are actually forging the incarnates that you want rather than trying to summon the champion or hero that you want. Now, the parts drop throughout the game, so there is some RNG around that, especially when it comes to the rarity of the part that you can get. But you get to choose how to build your incarnate lineup based on your playstyle. That is pretty freaking cool. So let's talk about parts and specifically the differences between parts. There's a few differences between all the parts in the game. First, let's talk about rarity. So for rarity, you can receive a common, a rare, an epic, or a legendary part. They generally make up what rarity your incarnate is going to be. They all have different abilities, and some are more powerful than others, as you can imagine. Each part has an affinity associated with it as well. It can either be the life, death, or void affinity. And in the previous video, we talked about how affinities, when you use the forge, create the affinity of your overall incarnate. So if you have two or more affinities of the same type, that incarnate becomes that affinity. So you can see in this window over here, here are all abilities that I have for the mind slot. And again, each of these parts can fill one slot in your incarnate. And the interesting thing about this is that based on the slot type, you actually generate base stats. And each slot type has some stats that are being given by that part. So as an example, my speed can be dictated by all of the parts. Each of these parts contribute to the speed of my champion. However, from a presence standpoint, the only part of your incarnate that influences the presence is the mind. You'll notice that when I select the body piece and when I select the soul piece, there's no presence added from either of those parts in those slots. So the mind spot or mind slot, its part generates the presence of your incarnate. Same kind of goes for the movement and the range. So the movement is dictated by the body, and the range is dictated by the soul. So when you're building your incarnates, it's very important to look at how these parts contribute to the overall base stats of your incarnate, and you need to pay attention to that as you're building. So let's talk about the ascension levels as well. So each of these parts can have ascension levels. So you'll get parts to drop throughout the game, whether it's completing a wave or it's completing a boss fight or a campaign fight, or I'm assuming some form of PvP fight will drop parts. You can get them to drop from 1 star to 6 star. Obviously, the more challenging aspects of the game are going to be dropping the higher stars. And as you go through, this is a good example here for Spite Blade. If you notice, I've got a 5-star Spite Blade here in my soul slot. And the range and the speed let's just note those are 6 and 30. If I go up to the 6-star Spite Blade, they don't change for the rage and speed, but you did see that there's some adjustment on the other stats like max HP. So let's go back to the 5-star. The 5-star has 936 max HP, and the 6-star has 1057 max HP. So as you ascend those parts, and the finalization of the ascension system isn't known yet, but as you ascend them, the parts give you more base stats, which make your incarnates stronger. So that's pretty cool from the perspective of getting your champion, or your incarnate in this case, to be stronger over the course of time. So each part is associated with an incarnate type. So in this case, all of these parts are Archon types. All of these parts are Judge. All of these parts are Nizari. All of these parts are Titan. And all of these parts are Void Watchers. Now, all of these incarnates have a theme or a play style associated with them. The Void Watchers deal with a lot of zombies and summoning creatures. The Titan's more of your tank and smash type character. Your Nizari is more of a very spiky damage dealer that's more melee range. Your Judge is more of your protection and your healing. And your Archon is more of your mage class and can summon rifts and does a lot of terraforming as well. So each of these parts are actually going to follow that theme based on the style or the type of incarnate they're associated with. Now, again, you can mix and match every type of incarnate with another. You can only have 3 parts equipped at one time. So in this case, I've got 3 Void Watcher incarnates, or parts rather, equipped over here. And I can see that my my incarnate represents a Void Watcher. Now, if I were to change all of these to Archon parts, you can see that the incarnate model now resembles or represents an Archon incarnate, and same goes for all of the other ones. So we'll just go through this again with the Titan just to give you a feel for what they look like. So there's your Titan, again, more melee, tanky, smash type character. And we'll go to the Nizari, and there's your kind of more melee damage dealing if you put all Nizari parts together. And lastly, we'll look at the Judge. This is again your healing and protection, more of your support character. So as you build your incarnate and you mix and match and go throughout different parts and select different pieces, you start noticing that you get different looking incarnates based on the parts that you've put into the mind, body, or soul slots. Again, you can mix and match any of them, and really what it comes down to is finding the right synergy between the part abilities that you have equipped that gives you the maximum potential for that incarnate. So the way you know what the part ability is when you click on one of these parts, you will get this card. And the card tells you what the ability does. It tells you what the ascension rating is for that part. And it also tells you what affinity is and what the cooldown on that ability is. So as you build these champions, you really want to be aware of what the cooldowns are. Now, in the soul slot for any incarnate, your cooldown is always going to be a 1-turn cooldown. That's effectively your default ability. So the soul ability or the soul part gets you that ability that you can do on every single turn. Your body and your mind parts give you more of the cooldowns and more powerful abilities that the incarnate has. And it's not to say that the soul isn't a powerful ability. It's just these are, again, auras and buffs and cooldowns that you want to be mindful of as you're playing the game to give you the maximum potential damage or maximum potential win rate when using them. So in this case, you can see the mind slot is filled with the part called Pardon. It's a Judge part, and it has a 3-turn cooldown. Right now it's at a 5-star ascension, and it is of the life affinity. So I have, let's see, I've got 2 life parts associated right now. And if I were to forge this incarnate, I would actually have a life affinity incarnate. All right, so you might be asking how many parts are in the game. I had the same question, and I originally thought that because each part could potentially have a rarity associated with it and a different affinity associated with it, I thought the amount of parts in the game would look something like this, where you had one affinity with each rarity for each slot that you could have for the incarnate. That turns out to be something like 216,000 incarnates that you could possibly build if this were the model. That is not true. um, I thought that was crazy, but the real system is more like this, where you have 4 parts for each slot, for each slot and incarnate. So what it boils down to is you have 20 parts for each slot that you can fill. So when you do the math, it actually turns out that you have 8,000 unique incarnates that you can build if you were to collect all these and create unique combinations of each of the incarnates. That's still a ton of incarnates. If you're a collector and you love collector games and you want to get all of those incarnates, you're going to have to create 8,000 incarnates to do that. Now, whether or not they're going to allow enough storage for having 8,000 incarnates, that's to be determined. I'm not sure that's feasible, but that is the amount of incarnates that you can create in this game. It's absolutely insane. Now, obviously, some of these parts are not going to synergize well with other parts, and you're probably going to want to avoid those combinations. It's more likely that you're going to have a handful of those 8,000s that you're actually going to feel like it's going to add benefit or value to your account. So you can see that each of the mind slots in the Void Watcher have 4 rarity types. So there's the common, the rare, the epic, and the legendary, and they're mixed and matched with the affinity types. So what it comes down to is that you actually have equal opportunity effectively to create any type of affinity that you want for that incarnate. And the numbers are actually over here. So based on the parts that are in the game today and the affinity associations with those parts, you have 26% chance to create life, void, or death. And it's not really necessarily, again, it's not a chance to create them. It's that's what's available out of the 8,000. So 26% of those 8,000 incarnates are going to be life, void, or death each. So 26% each. The balance is slightly lower just based on the amount of affinities and parts that are in the game. It's still very close. It's at 22%. So 22% of the total population of incarnates can be balanced. So when you're forging that, again, you have very equal opportunity to create each of these affinities for your incarnate. So I have been tracking, along with a few other people in the alpha test, the parts and their specific abilities. So if you're interested in seeing what the parts are and what the abilities are like and the cooldowns, I will share this link so you can actually go ahead and see what the parts look like. There's also another Discord server that has a lot of the same information that is available. It's acting almost like a wiki to capture this data as well. And assuming the owner of that wiki and Discord server is open to me sharing it, I will do so in the description here. And that way you guys can follow along with all the parts and information for the game Incarnate that we're capturing on a regular basis throughout the alpha test. All right, so that's it for parts, at least the basics of them. In another video series, I will go through actually what each part is and show you some gameplay associated with those parts specifically. It's been really fun testing out combinations of parts and seeing what synergizes and what doesn't. It's going to be very important to understand the wording of each of the parts. As an example, some of the parts have actions based on your move, and some of them have actions based on the end of your turn. So as we get more information on the game and we start seeing more gameplay, I'll show that to you and how they actually work and what the meaning of the text in each of those parts are. So as always, if you guys like this video, feel free to subscribe and throw me a like. Definitely send some comments my way because feedback's always important. And I hope to see you guys soon.